Texas and Kansas State play this weekend in a huge matchup that certainly has Big 12 championship implications.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. We are strictly talking Texas, Kansas State on the podcast today, and I brought in an expert, my brother Jeff Burkhart, Kansas State alum, class of 2011. And you told me that you were making your first ever trip to Austin, Texas for this game on Saturday, likely the last time that Texas and Kansas State play, at least for a while. What are you excited about going to Austin this weekend? What are you excited to try or eat or what have you heard about the city thus far?
Honestly, as a Kansas City native, and it's about 20 degrees out here right now, I'm excited for the warmth. That's one thing. But no, I've heard it's just it's a very unique setting, kind of a weird in the sense that it does have kind of a college town feel, even in a bigger atmosphere, and that Austin's always been so warm and inclusive and accepting. Like I'm just excited to go out there, see what it's like down there. I've obviously plenty of spots to eat and everything. I've been trying to scope out and drill down to where we want to go, and we're going to be down there for a few nights. So no idea what we're going to do yet, but we'll figure out when we're down there. We're just excited to go. It's going to be a good ball game, no doubt about it.
For sure. Definitely going to be a good ball game. And Texas got that random cold front this week. So I'm looking, it's 49 degrees in Austin right now, but the high is 78 on Saturday. So you should have a good time in DKR. Jeff, I want to ask you, coming into the season, most of the Big 12 championship talk was about Texas and Kansas State, right? A lot of people felt like Texas would be the runaway favorites in the conference this year, and that hasn't necessarily been the case, but they've been one of the best teams. But people felt like Kansas State was the biggest contender to Texas in the Big 12 this year, even more so than Oklahoma. Now, after the Oklahoma State game, not sure how many games that was in the season, Kansas State had two losses pretty early, right? You had the loss to Missouri on the road, and then you had the loss to Oklahoma State on the road. And at that point, it looked as though Kansas State was not the team that everybody thought they were coming into the season. So I just want to ask you, as an alum and a diehard fan, what were your thoughts on Kansas State and the program immediately following the Oklahoma State loss?
That was a frustrating game. If you looked at the Vegas number going into that one, I think it opened at like K-State by 9, and then it's just swelled. It went up to about 11.5, 12. So I think a lot of people obviously felt like K-State was just going to run away and hide in Stillwater, and that's been a tough out for Kansas State. They only have one win against Oklahoma State in Stillwater since 1999. So I was a little concerned, and then you go into that matchup, and very quickly K-State had scored on its opening drive in its first 4 games, and then bam, 3 and out, right back to Oklahoma State. And you thought, okay, we might be in for a dogfight, and they go right down the field and score. And it was just a frustrating night. And I think the biggest thing that came to my mind during that game, and even after the result went final there, was just the hubris that this team maybe entered the season with. Will Howard, they kind of flirted with that line of confidence versus arrogance. And I think they came into that feeling maybe a little inflated because they'd rang up 40 points without breaking much of a sweat, and honestly left points on the field against Mizzou, left points on the field against UCF, and they were still having no trouble really manufacturing yards, had almost 600 yards of total offense against UCF in their conference opener. So I think this team was maybe a little conceited going into that matchup, and Oklahoma State brought him back down to earth very quick. You don't want to get into a bar fight with Mike Gundy in his own backyard, man. He's gonna take you out back and show you what's what, and that's what they did. K-State had a lot of trouble in that game manufacturing yards, and 3 catastrophic interceptions by Will Howard, including a pick 6. They had a turnover on downs inside the 20. Just left a lot out on that on the field against Oklahoma State. Now that's turned out to be not a halfway bad loss at the end of the day, as we see this big 5-way tie for first place. But at the time, a lot of frustration. But in the same breath, this team's found a way to kind of turn itself around and right the ship here. So I know we've got other items to get into, but yeah, that it was very frustrating. But I think in a way that was the kind of game that needed to happen to wake the squad up and help them realize their potential.
Yeah, when you're dealing with college kids, it seems like every team needs that one loss to wake them up and, remind them of their goals. And I will say, I was just as frustrated as you watching that game randomly. I had quit gambling for months, right? I had quit gambling for months. And then one day I got the itch and decided to bet again. And it was just happened to be the night that Kansas State played Oklahoma State. So I'm like, let me put some money on Kansas State. They're going to beat Oklahoma State pretty handily. And then I saw Will Howard throw those 3 picks, and I'm like, this is exactly why I quit gambling. You talked about how Kansas State has been better for it, right? They've been a lot better since that loss. And honestly, they've not only looked like the best team in the Big 12, they've looked like one of the best teams in the country, right? They're averaging over 40 points a game since that loss, and they've outscored their opponents the last 2 weeks 82-3. That'll work for sure. So what are your thoughts on the way that the team is playing right now?
Yeah, they have really just hit their stride. And again, I think it gets back to kind of what I touched on there. They just needed that wake up call, and they've been so much sharper in their focus and their preparation. That's the big thing that stood out to me. They've cleaned up the mistakes. Again, we talked about the 3 picks at Oklahoma State. K-State's only had 1 turnover in the last 3 games, and that was by Avery Johnson. And Will Howard has been much sharper in his delivery. He's taken what's been given to him by defenses. He hasn't tried to force anything, which again has been very refreshing to see. Defensively, they've really just locked in. They played a really fine game against Texas Tech, albeit they gave up some yards in that game, but they were rallying to the ball very well, and Baron Morton ended up taking shots in that game. He did get knocked out. I don't think there was anything malicious on the part of Kansas State's defense during that game. They were just dialing up pressure. They were getting to him, and they were forcing him to make overthrows, make bad decisions in the pocket. They were rushing him, and again, it's been a very good complementary effort. You've seen all phases really just kind of elevate, and again, more so than anything else, it's just been quarterback play has been a lot more effective. They've been much more conscientious with the ball, and it's shown in the box scores. They've just been ringing teams up and getting back to what they did at the start of the season. But again, I think the focus has been a little bit more dialed in here in recent weeks. And like I said, it really does start with the offense, and I think it's been the Will Howard and the Avery Johnson effect that's had a lot of impact on this as well.
Yeah, and I was really impressed with their defensive performance. Talking about the quarterbacks, and we'll get to that next. But I was really impressed with their defensive performance last week against Houston, because the week prior, I live in Houston. I was at the Texas U of H game, right? And I watched Donovan Smith throw for 378 yards. Our defense could not stop them at all. And then Kansas State comes back the next week and shuts them out, right? So I'm like, okay, clearly that defense and offense is hitting on all cylinders right now. You talked about the freshman quarterback, Avery Johnson, right? And since he's been inserted the last 3 weeks, that's really what sparked this run. And over the last 3 games, the Kansas State quarterbacks between Will Howard, and Avery Johnson have accounted for 12 touchdowns. That's a lot in 3 games, right? So what type of juice has Avery Johnson brought to this Kansas State football team that wasn't there, in the Oklahoma State game and before?
He's a special athlete. There's no doubt about it. He is the fastest player on the team too. Like this is, and that's not hyperbole. He could dust some of the wide receivers, no doubt about it. He just brings a different element with his legs, and the arm talent is there as well. If you watch the ball coming off of his hands, there's good zip on it, and it's really just a matter of him being able to make that next step in terms of comprehension of coverages, pre-snap reads, and I think a lot of people kind of fell into the trap after the Texas Tech game where the offensive coaches saw that he gave them the spark. They decided to ride the hot hand, and everybody just assumed, oh, this is going to be Avery's squad from here moving forward. And that wasn't the case. Will Howard came out first drive the next week against TCU, led a touchdown, and it was very, very clear that the coaches still believe in Will Howard, and they know that his experience is invaluable, and that he can still be a key cog in this whole outfit. But Avery is again the wild card that makes this team very special. His legs and his ability to hit holes, to turn up field quickly cannot be understated. He's got I don't want to make the comp too early in his career, but Lamar Jackson is the name that comes up with a lot of folks. His ability to just find seams very quickly, hit the hole, turn up field, and get north-south so fast. He's electrifying. And it was very it was very cool to see in the game against TCU in particular. It was a night game, great atmosphere, coming back home after that 5-touchdown performance when Avery got in for that first series. You could feel the crowd just hold its breath when he ran because they know he's a threat to hit a home run every time he touches the ball and every time he gets out in the open field. So he's a special athlete, has some ways to go in his development, but he definitely does give this offense an element of electricity that it didn't really have previously. K-State was very methodical with Will Howard, with DJ Giddens and others. This gives you that home run hitter. In effect, it kind of replaces what Deuce Vaughn gave you last year, but this is the guy calling the signal. So again, a little bit added, another added element to this offense to make defenses account for it in their preparation. K-State's going to be a tough unit to defend just because of his ability to get out in the open field, and he can also drop dimes in the passing game.
Yeah, so I have a lot of confidence in my Longhorns, but if that brother looks like anything like Lamar Jackson on Saturday, then I think we're in for a long 60 minutes. A quick word from our sponsors, and we're going to get into more of our conversation with Kansas State alum Jeff Burkhart. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. Plenty of new innovative ways to make money with PrizePicks. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return until the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, and now you can deposit money onto PrizePicks using Apple Pay, making it easier for you to make money. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege, code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. All right, Jeff, I want to ask you, and this seems like a theme thus far when coaches are talking about this Texas football team, right? We've played 8 games, and I would say at least 3 to 4 of them, the coaches have said this is the most talented Texas team they have seen in a while that they've faced. And Coach Kleiman was one of the coaches to echo that, right? He said that this is the most talented Texas team that he can remember, right? I know obviously you're not watching Texas games every week like we are, but from what you've seen and what you know about this Texas team, would you echo that statement? Does this feel like one of the most talented Texas teams that Kansas State is facing off against in a while?
Whew, man, the group last year that was a game that I attended, and again, UT was talented last year, but you could tell they were maybe a year away. This year, it seems like they really have arrived in earnest, and I say that even in spite of the loss to Oklahoma, where I think Oklahoma was just in that fortuitous position late in the game. They were the last team to have the ball, but I still think Texas is very much the class of the Big 12. Offensive line is terrific. Jonathan Brooks has stepped in admirably for Bijan Robinson. Quinn Ewers has been fine. I know he's going to be on the shelf with that AC joint issue, but even so, looking at the offense, they're a complete unit. Defensively, they don't give you a whole lot of anything in the run game, uh, and they're stacked at all 3 levels. And I saw Jahdae Barron just named a semifinalist for the Thorpe Award. They've got talent, and I think whatever Sark has done to, and I hate using this proverb of change the culture, but man, they feel like they really have arrived and realized their potential. What's been advertised for so many years, routinely bringing in the top 10, the top 5 recruiting classes, having the Johnnies and Joes, but just never really able to make that materialize on the field and have it translate into 9-10 win seasons, conference championship appearances, college football playoff appearances. It wasn't there, but Sark has clearly changed the attitude within the program. And again, I do feel that this is one of the most talented Texas teams, at least that I can remember here in recent memory. I'm very anxious to see what they look like on the field this Saturday. Um, it's going to be a fun ball game, no doubt about it. But this team can absolutely, I think, go toe to toe with just about anybody in the country. We saw that earlier against Alabama. To go and win in Tuscaloosa, not many teams do that. Everybody
Yeah.
says that Nick Saban and Bama are down this year, but man, it's still there is a very small number of teams that can go into Tuscaloosa at night and not just win, but win pretty decisively. Texas left a lot of points on the field in that ball game. This is a team that I still feel talent-wise likely still the class of the Big 12, but it's going to be tough for them to go out and kind of prove it here. They're going to have to do it with a backup these next couple of weeks, and a tricky game with Iowa State too. Can they finish the drill? I think like what you talked about, Texas is the class of the Big 12. I still think that's the case, but got a couple of tricky spots here that they got to find a way to navigate.
Yeah, especially starting this Saturday against a really tough Kansas State team who, like I said, the last 3 weeks, they've been the best team in the conference, bar none to me. We had Christian Jones, the starting right tackle for the Texas Longhorns, on the podcast a few weeks ago. He was a part of the Tom Herman and the Sark eras. And you talked about, that changing the culture. He talked about Sark bringing in Culture Wednesdays and how this just is a different football team, right? And I think that starts in the locker room. It starts on the practice field, and that has to translate onto the actual football field. And I think that's something we're seeing for the first time at the University of Texas in a long time. Obviously, for Kansas State to win this game, I think all units have to hit on all cylinders, right? Offense, defense, special teams, even the coaching, right? It all has to, hit at a high level this weekend. But which unit in particular do you think needs to be the most dominant unit on the field, or the field that can carry the unit that can carry this Kansas State team to victory on Saturday? Is it the offense, defense, or the special teams?
I've gone back and forth on that so much. I really do feel that it's going to have to be Kansas State's offense. I say that just kind of as a byproduct of what I've seen in these couple of matchups between Sarkisian and Kleiman. Texas has found ways to run the ball, and I think last year too, in particular, that was one where I remember going into that game. Quinn Ewers, I think the week prior, maybe 2 weeks prior, had like a 49 or 50 pass attempt ball game against Oklahoma State, a game that Texas should have very easily won. And they went away from the running game inexplicably in that game and put it all on the freshman's arm, and very adverse weather conditions too. And then they looked at Kansas State and they said, you know what, let's just get back to the basics of running the football. And they tuned up Kansas State in that ball game, and Bijan did pretty much anything that they wanted. They ran for 269 yards. They were just like, it seemed like every snap, second level, second level, second level. The offensive line was winning the day. So I feel like in this game, though, in a weird way, I feel like Kansas State's offense is going to need to be the unit that really does carry them, because I do have concerns about Kansas State being able to slow down the run. The Wildcats' rush defense has been fine to date. It's only allowing 108 yards on the ground per game. But it's one of those things where I question the number a little bit, only in the sense that the competition has not been great. Kansas State has played well, and they've disposed of inferior teams here in recent weeks. But in the same breath, it's become pretty apparent to me, and I think to most outside observers looking in, that the newcomers in the Big 12, UCF, Houston, and others, are talent-wise, they are not quite there. This is very clearly a step up from the American, and Kansas State, a couple of their conference wins have come against those teams. They've faced a plethora of backup quarterbacks. 3 of their 4 conference wins have come against backup QBs. So I think the offense is going to have to be the unit that just keeps pace. That I feel like they're going to have to put the pressure on Malik Murphy and the Texas offense to continue to score. And again, this is very much a pick your poison proposition. As I said, Texas's rush defense is tremendous. And that's kind of what Kansas State's bread and butter is. If K-State can run the ball effectively, and if they can score and keep pace, I think the Wildcats will have a good shot to come out and win this ball game. Because I feel like Sarkisian is going to try and take the ball out of Malik's hands and say, let's lean on this offensive line. Let's lean on Brooks and Baxter and have them be the ones to carry us to a win. That's kind of where I'm leaning on this. Now, Texas obviously has that weapons on the perimeter, plenty of guys that they can spread the ball around to, but in the same breath, I don't think they want to put too much on Malik's shoulders in what's just going to be his second career start. So I feel like K-State's offense is going to have to be the unit that puts the pressure on Texas's offense to score and score a lot in this ball game if they want to win.
Yeah, certainly maybe a la, Oklahoma and Texas, like we talked about, if Kansas State can continue to score, like you said, make Malik Murphy match those points. And then if he can, maybe it just comes down to who has the ball last. And certainly
Exactly.
based on what we've seen over the last 3 weeks between Will Howard and Avery Johnson, they could drive down the field and get points when needed. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the final part of our conversation, asking Jeff about the history recently between Texas and Kansas State. And then the $1 million question we ask all of our guests: who wins and who covers? All right, this episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins off of a $5 bet. You cannot beat that. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on and kick off or continue to enjoy the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the National Football League. All right, Jeff, continuing our conversation. We've talked about how Texas has been in a down period, right? And, it's been a while since this Texas team has been able to match the production on the field with the type of recruiting classes that have been brought in. But that has kind of been separate from their matchups with Kansas State, because even in a down period for Texas, Kansas State has not won this game against the Longhorns since 2017. Do you think psychologically that'll have any impact on the game this Saturday?
I think it does to an extent, but like those past matchups between Bill Snyder and Tom Herman and whatnot, I don't think those weigh quite as heavily. Obviously, um, uh, I think the big thing is this team doesn't really seem to be phased by the helmet, so to speak. They went into Norman last year in a game that nobody really gave Kansas State much of a shot because they had just come off that really embarrassing loss against Tulane, only putting up 10 points. And then you get a night game against Oklahoma. Fox is coming in to broadcast it, and then they ring up the Sooners for 41. So the I don't think it's a concern necessarily with the helmet that they're facing or the stage. Um, I do feel like the caliber of athlete, though, that's the one thing. K-State really hasn't seen anything really comparable to what Texas could roll out onto the field on both sides of the ball. I think Mizzou, to an extent, Brady Cook's turned into a pretty good quarterback. They obviously have that three-headed monster of Luther Burden, Mookie Cooper, and Theo Weiss at wide receiver. So Mizzou has some personnel that you can maybe say Texas matches or exceeds, and I would say in a certain extent. But I think Kansas State just needs to, if they want to have a shot to win this game, they cannot get overwhelmed early on. That's the big thing. Texas, I remember, just marched very methodically down the field last year, got a touchdown, and even the year before when it was Casey Thompson who was dinged up, no Bijan Robinson in that game in 2021. And still Texas found a way to manufacture a couple of scoring drives early in that ball game, get out ahead of the Wildcats, and just they kind of held on. And I think that's the biggest thing for Kansas State is to learn from those past experiences, to find a way to weather the storm early on. If Texas does hit you in the mouth and get a scoring drive early, you're going to have to punch back, and you're going to have to punch back in a hurry, and you're going to have to settle in a hurry. So I feel like that's the biggest takeaway from the previous matchups between Sarkisian and Kleiman, is just staying focused, not getting too overwhelmed, too taken in by the atmosphere. I don't expect that to be a problem, but who knows? This is easily going to be the biggest stage for Kansas State this season, and I think both teams too kind of know that this is an elimination game in effect. If you lose this game, you are likely going to be on the outside looking in as far as the Big 12 championship game goes.
Yeah, that's a good point. And two things I want to mention. First, that loss to Tulane. Kansas State definitely should have won that game, but Tulane ended up really good, beating
I felt pretty good
USC
at the end of the
in
year.
the bowl game. So it ended up, a better win than it looked at the time. And I'll also say, Steve Sarkisian, one of the best offensive minds in college football, certainly one of the best at the opening script. So if Kansas State wants to win this game, then they definitely have to stop those first couple of drives because, Texas and Sark can definitely get out to maybe not a 14-0 lead, but they could put 14 points on the board in their first 2 drives pretty easily with the way Sark comes out with that opening script. All right, now it's time for you to pick the game. I would normally pick it with you, but I have been horrible this year, right? I am 0-6 in picking Texas games, right? I picked Bama to win. That was obviously wrong. I picked Baylor and Kansas to cover the spread. Now, I didn't know Jalen Daniels wasn't going to come out the locker room, so maybe I get a push on that one. But that one, I was wrong on those two. I picked Texas to beat Oklahoma. Obviously, I was wrong. And then who have they played since then? BYU. I said that they wouldn't cover. They covered, and whoever else, right? U of H. I said that they would cover, and they didn't. So I've just been all over the place. So I'm not picking this one. Texas is favored by 4.5 over Kansas State. Obviously, you think Kansas State has a great chance to win, or you wouldn't make the trip all the way from Kansas City to Austin. So I'm going to ask you, Jeff, who wins on Saturday and who covers?
I'm usually very cynical when it comes to picking K-State games because I tend to look at the deficiencies more than the positives and what the team has been doing well. And that's so weird. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to nitpick right now with the way K-State has performed these last 3 weeks. My biggest concern is K-State's just the ability to defend the run. Just thinking back at what Bijan and Roshan have been able to do historically against this K-State defense the last couple of years, and whether or not K-State can eliminate the run, and maybe not eliminate, but slow down Texas's running game. Jonathan Brooks is like I don't know if he's outpacing Bijan at this point through the season, but he's pretty darn close. He's almost to 1,000 yards already, man.
I think more yards, but less touchdowns. Like I think he has more yards than Bijan did, but less touchdowns. Yeah.
And the other concern too is K-State's downfield passing game. While the Wildcats again drove up and down the field against TCU and Houston, those are defenses that, if you look at like the S&P and a lot of the advanced numbers, are bottom of the barrel. We're talking in the 80s and 90s and a lot of the advanced metrics and points per drive, success rate, and so forth. So it wasn't really shocking to see Kansas State put up monster numbers against those units. So I'll be honest, I'm just a little too worried about K-State and whether or not they can slow down the Texas rushing attack. And I feel like that's really what's going to decide this game. If Sark can get out to an early advantage and he can just lean on that run game at home and just take the ball out of Malik's hands, not force him to make a lot of tough, high pressure throws in tough situations, I feel like Texas will have a pretty good shot to win this game. And K-State really hasn't been able to stretch the field vertically. They have to find a way to do that, and that's against one of the most talented back ends in the country. So I think that I think it'll be a tight game regardless. I feel like K-State will find a way to keep it competitive. Do they keep it within the number? I know that's bounced around from like 5.5, 4.5 somewhere. I'll say that this is a game that's going to be a little bit slower in pace, a little bit lower scoring is my expectation. I'll say Texas is likely going to be the one to come out on top. I think 27-20, somewhere in that neighborhood, is kind of my expectation. Certainly hoping that I'm wrong on that front, but I'm like you. I've been all over the board in terms of picking games for Kansas State this year, so I know next to nothing. So yeah, that's my thought is Texas 27-20. But hopefully we do see a competitive ball game and what's been a very tightly contested series, even in the midst of this 6-game winning streak Texas has over Kansas State. All these games, with the exception of the COVID game in 2020, they've all been competitive, all one-score affairs. Some have gone overtime. There's been theatrics in the late game. Last year comes to mind. Like I think we're in for a good game regardless. So that's my thought on it. But again, I know next to nothing.
All right. Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be a close game. I'm not picking it, obviously, because I've been wrong all year. I don't want to pick Texas to win and come back and bite me. But I will say, basically what you said. I think Sark is going to want to shorten the game. I think that we thought he was going to run the ball a ton against BYU, and he came out and passed it a lot more early than we thought he would. So Malik's certainly going to get his opportunities, but I think you want to be able to run the ball with all of those talented running backs you have and allow Malik Murphy to play within the offense, right? You never want to get into a situation in this game where Malik Murphy has to win the game for you. So as long as you can continue to let him be a game manager, a very talented game manager at that, and run the ball and then continue to do what you've done on defense at home. They have not allowed an opponent outside of Oklahoma to score more than 24 points this year. Hopefully that's the case against Kansas State this weekend. Thank you, Jeff, so much much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're getting ready to head to Austin to come on the podcast, and I really appreciate all of the Kansas State insight that you provided to Longhorn Nation today. Hook 'em and peace.